Welcome. Hello, Dr. Baker. First, let me thank you again on behalf of all of the cast and crew of SWAT for your advice and guidance over the months as we've been able to stay in production. Your help has been invaluable. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's been great to help.
So we know that things are always changing in the world of epidemiology, and as a new virus emerges and a pandemic happens, we learn things along the way, and so we know things about the vaccines now that we didn't know, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months ago. So just for the benefit of our cast and crew, I thought I'd ask some basic questions, and because there's a lot of news and advice swirling around and different news things. So just the science from a doctor like yourself about the vaccines. First of all, there are 3 vaccines that are currently available in this country: the Pfizer, the Moderna, the Johnson & Johnson. Are any one of them better than the others? And should you take the first vaccine offered, or should you wait for a specific one, in your expert opinion?
Yeah, so with very few exceptions, you should definitely take the first vaccine that you can be offered. Because the sooner you can get vaccinated, the sooner you're protected, the sooner your family and community are protected. Now, I know we've seen kind of lots of different numbers swirling around these vaccines. With Pfizer and Moderna are 95% effective. Johnson & Johnson is lower. And I would encourage you not to get too hung up on those numbers because they aren't actually directly comparable. The trials were done under completely different times. When the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was being trialed, there were other variants, around that weren't around when Pfizer and Moderna were doing their trials. And also, Pfizer and Moderna were looking at different outcomes than Johnson & Johnson were. Johnson & Johnson were looking for at least 2 symptoms. Pfizer and Moderna were looking for 1 symptom and a positive test. But they were all looking at hospitalization and death as endpoints. And across all 3, there were not any folks who received any of the 3 vaccines who ended up hospitalized or with severe or with death.
Oh, so that's worth reiterating. So people in these tests who took any of the 3 vaccines, none of them ended up hospitalized or died from COVID.
Correct. Yes. And each trial had about 40,000 participants in it. So these are big numbers, and care was taken to enroll folks across a wide range of ages, a wide range of races and ethnicities, all genders, geographic distribution. And so, that is a very strong clue to the scientific community, and certainly to the FDA, who ultimately gave emergency use approval to these vaccines, that these vaccines will save lives. They will keep people out of hospitals, regardless of the vaccine that you get.
These companies came up with these vaccines so fast. Should people worry that we haven't had time to look into what long-term consequences of taking the vaccine may be? How do I compare the risk of taking a vaccine to the risk of not getting vaccinated?
Yeah, so a year ago at this time, we did not have vaccines, and it does feel like a year has passed and we already have 3 vaccines. And the project was called Operation Warp Speed, and that can feel a little scary to think that under warp speed we have developed and deployed these vaccines we're trying to get into everybody's arms. Vaccine development usually takes quite a long time. And the main reason for that is because there are a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through, even to obtain funding. And you also often have lots of different labs across lots of different institutions, keeping information from each other, trying to kind of work to be the first. And with this vaccine development, not only was money readily handed out, so there wasn't the years-long process to secure funding, but we also had collaboration between all these different scientific groups to really push this forward. So what we were cutting out was not in any way the safety. We were cutting out the red tape, quite frankly, to get these vaccines up and going. Also, coronaviruses in general are a type of virus that we're already familiar with. And so there were already steps underway to develop vaccines against coronaviruses. So there was existing knowledge, funding was easily available, and people were all working together to make this happen. All steps of a typical FDA clinical trial that a vaccine would go under were followed. And they were followed for the typical time that a vaccine trial would last. Another, benefit was there were lots of cases of coronavirus going on while the trials were happening, such that they were able to actually get enough people to get sick, basically. Whereas if you're developing a vaccine for a much more rare disease, it can just take a lot of time for enough people to actually get that disease. So yes, it feels quick, and the name warp speed doesn't help. But the time was cutting out the red tape, the procuring funding, and all of the usual tests were followed.
And so you believe the science behind these vaccines is safe?
I do, yeah. It's not anything new. It's just being applied to this new emerging
Specific
disease.
strain and everything. Right. So in your medical field, do doctors generally trust these 3 vaccines? And what percentage of doctors are choosing to get vaccinated? These are the people that have the best knowledge of all this. Are doctors getting vaccinated in large numbers and trust this vaccine?
So doctors are now. So I will say that very, very early, like back in December, when these vaccines first came out, there was hesitancy among healthcare workers, less so doctors, but certainly nurses and folks who are in support staff. And a lot of that had to do with, concerns that, I'm pregnant, or I might want to be pregnant. Does this work for me? I don't want to feel like the guinea pig. So there was some hesitancy up front in the medical community. And I think that that's been well documented in Los Angeles as well. However, now we're in March, and even like into January and February, that hesitancy has been greatly reduced, as we've seen that even in the millions of people who have been vaccinated, there are very low rates of side effects, particularly of serious side effects. And now, the latest kind of numbers I've seen is that in the healthcare settings, the refusal rate is really around 5 to 10%. So the large majority of folks are eagerly accepting a vaccine. And that is not only in the medical community, but also in the public health communities as well.
90 to 95% of experts in medicine are choosing to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and those that aren't often might be folks who have a pre-existing condition, or are pregnant or wanting to become pregnant, and have some particular qualms specific to their circumstance.
Great. What do you say to people who are nervous about shots in general, nervous about possible side effects of the shot, and how should they weigh the risks of those things in the shots against the risks of not getting vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, I know that needles are not fun. No one wakes up and is like, I love getting shots. And this one, like any inoculation, does have some side effects associated with it. Mild things like maybe your arm is sore, kind of the way we're used to after a flu jab, but even can be some other effects like a headache, a slight fever, lymph nodes are swollen, and that's your body having an immune response to receiving the vaccination. And with the 2-dose series, we found that those side effects tend to be most common after the 2nd dose. And they also tend to be most common in younger individuals who have a healthier immune system. And that's just because that is your body doing exactly what it should, which is fighting off the invasive vaccine that is mimicking the virus. Keep in mind that none of these vaccines have live virus in them. So it is actually impossible to get COVID-19 from the virus. But
From the vaccine, you mean?
I'm sorry, from the vaccine, yes. It is, the way they are made is basically to train your immune system to attack the virus if the real virus were to come in. And so, any side effect that you have, even if it's uncomfortable and unpleasant, it's a good thing because it shows that it's working in your body. There have been some, very limited folks who have had, larger allergic reactions. And typically you would know if you've had an allergic reaction from a vaccine in the past. You probably want to talk to your primary care physician about when and what vaccine to get to reduce the risk of those types of side effects.
Okay, great. We live in a great country, but there are certainly shameful episodes in our past. And some people, especially African Americans in the past, haven't always been treated well by the government or the medical establishment in terms of, programs and tests that were sort of run. Why should everyone, including African Americans, trust that this vaccine is safe and effective to take? The government told them decades ago that certain things were safe and they weren't. Why should they be less skeptical of this particular program?
Yeah, and there is certainly generational trauma related to healthcare access, particularly healthcare access that has been pushed down by the government, particularly in our Black and Native communities. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I also know that in many communities, the Johnson & Johnson brand is not a trusted brand due to their baby powder and due to other events. And so in those cases, I think it's important to acknowledge, and we have to admit that we have screwed this up in the past. Steps are being taken to ensure that that is not the case now. But I think it is important for folks, particularly of some of those more vulnerable, marginalized populations that feel trepidation and fear around the vaccine, should talk to trusted members of their community, talk to people that you trust, whether that's your primary care physician, friends. Ultimately you want to get the vaccine because you feel comfortable. And sometimes that messaging needs to come from folks other than the government. I want everybody to get vaccinated. We need to get a good chunk of the population vaccinated in order to get past this pandemic and start to have our lives return to normal. But I don't want anybody to get a vaccine and feel scared, frightened, worried that they have made a choice that will end up being a greater risk. However, for many of those populations, unfortunately, due to the systemic racism inherent in our country and inherent in our medical system, if you get COVID-19, we've seen that there tend to be worse outcomes for people of color, and folks that may have certain comorbidities. So getting the vaccine, ensures that with much certainty, ensures that you won't have to be entering the medical system as a COVID-19 patient, which to me is a much greater risk, is to develop COVID-19 and be at the whims of the medical system than to proactively get the vaccine and know that I can protect myself and my family by doing that.
Thanks. Last question. Well, it's a two-part question, but so Johnson & Johnson is a one-shot vaccine. Moderna and Pfizer are 2 shots. And generally within 2 to 3 weeks, so you tell me, after the final shot of each one, Johnson & Johnson's only 1 shot, you're considered to enjoy the protection of these vaccines. How is life going to be different in the next month, 2 months, 3 months for those people who get vaccinated versus maybe the people who still decide they don't want to do it. What would you be comfortable doing 2 weeks past your final vaccination that you wouldn't be comfortable doing unvaccinated? While clearly things are getting better, but we are not out of the woods with COVID-19 yet.
Mhm.
So talk about how life would be different, the different kinds of things people could do once they're 2 weeks past their final vaccination shot.
Yeah. So we are still learning a lot about the vaccines, and in particular, how long, the immunity is good for with the vaccines. But we have good reason to believe that, it will be a certain number of months or hopefully years. And that the immunity that you receive from the vaccine will last longer than the immunity from if you actually had a case of COVID-19. So I think that's important to kind of just mention. Even if you've had COVID-19, you should still get the vaccine and take the benefit of that longer immunity. So as our vaccine campaign continues, I think we'll start to learn how long that immunity is good for. But what we've already been cleared to do by the CDC is if you have been fully vaccinated, you are welcome to gather indoors unmasked with other individuals who have been fully vaccinated. And that's awesome. I will be able to go once I get my, what? Yeah. Once I get my second vaccine, I'll be able to see my parents who I haven't seen for quite some time. Like we might be able to and that's kind of what Biden was referring to with getting together for the 4th of July, is that, if you have you and your group of family or friends who have all been vaccinated, you can gather together in that kind of normal way. That's kind of the short-term immediate benefit. Farther down the line, I don't think it's out of the question to be asked to show proof of vaccination to get on a plane, to potentially go to certain live events. And so there could be potential benefits to being able to move around the world, partake in some of the activities that you enjoy, particularly as, we are trying to open things up to more normal capacity instead of limited. But, I think the other thing is just feeling comfortable doing some of the things that maybe we already can do, but shouldn't be doing, like going to a restaurant to eat. That's something that I have not done throughout the whole pandemic. I've gotten a lot of takeout. But once I'm fully vaccinated, I will feel that, I can go and do that because I will not be doing harm to those around me. And I myself will be protected. So I think it's just feeling comfortable partaking in daily life, both the mundane things like hugging a friend and also the more exciting things like getting on a plane and traveling somewhere.
Yeah, going to a wedding. There were weddings I was supposed to go to in the last year that had to be canceled and everything. So to sum up, in your opinion, the vaccines are safe. It's kind of a mini miracle that we have them so fast. We should take, sounds like your opinion is we should take advantage of this miracle, take the first vaccine that you're offered when you're eligible to take it. And it feels like the country is on the road to recovery in many ways because of this. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it feels very hopeful, and we now have 3 vaccines, and they are all excellent, and they all are extremely protective against hospitalization and death from COVID-19, and that's exactly what we want. And we also are seeing that they likely reduce transmission as well. And they're very safe, very effective, and the fact that we have them at all, as you said, Shawn, is really just showing how quickly the world's scientists rallied around this problem and solved it in a safe way. So yeah, get out there and get that vaccine, and encourage others to as well.
Well, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for speaking to our cast and crew about this important subject. Again, thanks for your continued help along the way. And to all of you watching, hope this was useful and educational to you, and be safe and be well. Thank you.